Hi friends and companions along this path of spiritual practice. Imagine a hot summer day. A girl decides to go out and play basketball with her friends and teammates. Depending on how strenuous the basketball game and how hot the day, chances are good that she might experience dehydration. From a biomedical point of view, dehydration would be a state of the body in its process of managing heat, where the body's ability to maintain water for the cooling process has been outpaced by the loss of fluids. And if it's severe enough, it might lead to dehydration and fainting, and maybe even threaten life. That's from a narrow biomedical perspective. But there are other forces that you and I would wonder about. Like, might she have refrained from taking fluids because she's in an intense moment and she really wants to win the game? Or might the team and her friends have a culture so that there is judgment, or they frown upon taking too much water prematurely? Or is there no access, no water nearby? These are all possible elements of the narrative that shapes that moment. The biomedical framing is simply a narrow slice of that wider relationship between that child and the situation she finds herself. Maybe the biomedical framing is compelling. Maybe it's dominant because it affords a way of approaching the situation that is more likely to be rendered controllable, manageable, maybe even solvable. We see a more direct causal link. After all, responding to weather is more simple than responding to that complicated thing called climate. And so from a biomedical perspective, or from a very narrow perspective of whatever our choosing, everything else is rendered incidental, circumstantial. But what is circumstantial and incidental becomes even more significant when these moments of dehydration, these moments of black neighbors who are saying they can't breathe, over and over again, they repeat, and we begin to wonder whether there might be something inside those incidental and circumstantial factors. The Minneapolis City Council Vice Chair Andrea Jenkins said that these conditions, these values and dispositions and orientations in the larger narrative is about racism. And so Jenkins urged her colleagues to declare racism a public health measure, to declare racism as that larger dynamic of values and dispositions and orientations that are killing people. What does this have to do with spiritual practice? With meditation, we have been moving through wandering mind and allowing it to settle into focused mind. And then as we apply that focus, we begin to face the agitations, the worries, the nervousness, the stress in a mind that is afflicted. And as we stay with that afflicted mind, we begin to approach another realm where we are mindful of our mind itself. And in the Buddhist tradition, what we become mindful of is that big and complicated word called karma. Karma is about our values, our dispositions, our orientations. Karma shapes our perception and our understanding. A value is nothing other than a shorthand for meaning, for strategy for how we're going to move and conduct ourselves. A value is a mode of appreciation. A value captures certain patterns of what is meaningful to us. And so karma is about this climate, this field of values, orientations, dispositions. In this realm of mindful mind, we come to realize that what we are facing are not problems, but predicaments. A problem is a problem because there are changing circumstances, and to solve this problem, we just need to be better at applying the means to achieve our valued ends. The values, our dispositions, our orientations are still intact. The problem simply requires a better application, usually technical, to solving the problem. But a predicament like climate is so much more complex, because a predicament is a predicament because changing circumstances reveal that our original values are not so simple. Our values run into competing values, and there are many. One of the values that we hold in white dominant culture is that racists are people who are consciously, intentionally, individually doing acts of racial harm and injustice. We recognize that focus on valuing the individual, the conscious, and the intentional. And then we run into this other value of how we are interdependently implicated already in white dominant culture. So then the question no longer is about whether or not if I'm racist. It's how does racism already show up in the values that I hold? As we practice meditation and we step into the mindfulness of our mind itself, we begin to illuminate how our values have already been implicated in racism. This is difficult and challenging work, friends. It is looking at the multitude of complex values in the climate, in the conditions, in the values and orientations that we have been living for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so we take our seat and we touch mindfulness of our karma. And so we continue with our spiritual practice.